Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well and croeso, welcome to module EDPM19, Additional Learning Needs and Inclusion, Anghenion Dysgu Ychwanegol a Chynhwysiant. So this is just a quick introduction video to give you a bit of a heads up about what the module will cover and in particular what the assessment for this module looks like. So thinking about the module itself then, so I've taken this from the module proforma available on the intranet, which suggests that this module will allow students to engage in key debates around additional learning needs and inclusion. So we will see as we go through the module that inclusion does mean all learners, and it isn't restricted to just those learners with additional learning needs, for example, but there will be a key focus on additional learning needs or special educational needs, especially in the first half of the module. And as we move through the module, we will then broaden our focus a little to think about inclusion of wider groups of learners. We'll think a little bit about up-to-date theory and debate critically about ALN, both in Wales and internationally. So we will look at different theories of ALN and also look at best practice, thinking about why Wales has moved away from an SEN system towards an ALN system, for example, what underpinned that, what's been the impact of that on learners, for example, in terms of different approaches towards supporting learning needs. As it says then, the module will be structured around three main topics, so inclusion, as we said, all learners, ALN policy in Wales specifically we will cover, but we will also broaden this out to other parts of the UK and globally as well, and also think a little bit about best practice in supporting learners with ALN. Now, ALN as a terminology, we will see this throughout the module a lot. Realistically, as we are based in Wales, and this is the terminology that we are using, that's why ALN is the key focus. However, when we talk about ALN, when you're thinking about practice outside of Wales, then SEN, ASN, for example, would be perfectly appropriate to think about. Okay. So thinking a little bit about the assessment for the module then, so the module itself has got two parts to the assessment. The first one is a 90-minute in-class test, and this in-class test will take place on Monday the 9th of March, and this in-class test will be worth 25% of the overall mark for this module. Now I know the phrase in-class test sounds a little bit off-putting. However, I'll mention this a little bit more on the next slide, and obviously in more detail when we meet together for our first session when the module gets going. And the second part of the assessment then is a kind of a standard 3,000-word academic essay, which comes in then right at the end of the module, which is due on Monday the 18th of May, and is worth the remaining 75% of the overall mark for this module. So briefly then, what does the in-class test involve? Now, the in-class test will take 90 minutes, will be completed within one of our module sessions. So rather than asking you to come in on a different day, we will use our session on Monday the 9th of March and facilitate the test within that session itself. So what do you have to do to complete the in-class test, and what is expected of you in the assessment? So on the day, you will be presented with a one-page pupil profile for three different learners with ALN who display a range of needs. We will look at examples of these before the in-class test. Prior to the in-class test, you will work on designing and producing a session plan for a lesson. So entirely up to you what age group of learners you want this to be with, what subject or area of learning you might want to focus on, and then more specifically what the content and the strategies used within the lesson would be. So you will very much design this lesson plan. Again, we will spend time in each week working towards this as we go through up until the in-class test. On the day of the test itself, you will have access to the session plan that you have drafted, and then you will go back into your session plan with the knowledge that you now have from these one-page pupil profiles to think a little bit about whether what you already planned meets those learners' needs, and if so, outlining how it does so. Equally, you might find, do you know what, I need to think a little bit more, or I need to do something different to meet that learner's needs, and you will be asked to go back into your session plan and make appropriate amendments. Your lesson plan will also be accompanied with a justification for the decisions you have made. Again, some of that will be written in advance, some of that will be added to or written on the day of the test itself. So you will be asked to think about, if you've said in your session plan, for example, you are going to use teaching assistants, or you're going to make sure that all resources for learners are dyslexia friendly, as an example, why? Can you justify those approaches that you've been taking? In terms of the word count, now there is no word count itself for the session plan. However, the justification of the decisions you made is 1,000 words. And there will be an expectation that this is supported with citations and references as well. Now, again, I would say at least half of that justification you can draft in advance of the in-class test. So very much the focus of the in-class test is you bring with you the the session plan that you have designed for your particular lesson, thinking about how you've planned it that way and what activities you are going to do and what strategies you've got to support. You're then going to be given the information about these 3 unseen learners that you didn't know were going to be in the class, and you will go back into your session plan and think about, have I met their needs based on what I've already done? And if so, how do I evidence that? Or might I need to do something different? And if so, what would you add or amend or tweak as a result? So hopefully that's useful at the moment. However, we will spend a lot more time talking about that when we meet for the first session. One thing that I should say, though, is that you will not be expected to teach this session. This is very much just setting out a lesson plan and thinking about whether your strategies and approaches and activities are inclusive or not. The second part of the assessment then perhaps is a little bit more straightforward. So this is a 3,000-word academic essay, and you will have a choice from one of the 3 titles on the slide to base your essay upon. So either you will critically discuss the concept of inclusion. Now, as we go through the module, we will see that despite the fact most people are positive about the concept of inclusion, there is a lack of a standard definition, for example, which means it can be viewed differently in different parts of the world. As a result, that might mean we have inconsistent practice which impacts upon outcomes for learners. So you will think about inclusion. What does this mean as a concept? How do we enable this in practice, for example? The second option is to argue the importance of the environment in additional learning needs. So thinking about learners who have an additional learning need like dyslexia or dyscalculia or ADHD or ASD, for example, how might the environment that they find themselves in impact upon that learner? So we will look at this through the lens of neurodiversity, neurodivergence and autism, for example. So thinking about how might the everyday school classroom environment impact on a learner with those needs, but equally you can broaden this out to whatever area of need that you want. And the final option is to think about evaluating the role of the educator in additional learning needs. Now again, educator is quite a broad role. We could be thinking about teachers here. Equally, we could be thinking about teaching assistants. Equally, we could be thinking about education in perhaps more informal settings as well. So again, we will spend more time focusing upon this when we meet for our first session. And just as a quick note at the bottom of the slide, as a reminder, although ALN is the terminology in Wales, there is no expectation that you have to set your assignment within Wales. Therefore, you would use the terminology that is appropriate to the setting. So if you were to focus your assignment in England, for example, or Nigeria, then you would focus on SEN as the terminology. So there is no expectation that Wales has to be specifically or explicitly discussed within the assignment, although potentially it could be, depending upon how you want to take that assignment forward. So I'm going to stop talking there before I complicate things before we meet for the first time. I look forward to meeting up with you all for our first session, which is on Monday, the 26th of January in the Richard Price building in room 036. Any questions that you have before the module starts, then please feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, welcome to the module, and I very much look forward to working with you on the module as we go through this term.